Okay, so let's dive straight into this fascinating stack of sources we have today. We're exploring the dynamics of power and influence, well, how they're laid out in this collection. Principles, history, fables, it's all in there.
Yeah, it's quite a mix.
Our mission is really to cut through the noise, navigate these texts, pull out the core insights, the surprising, maybe sometimes uncomfortable bits, to give you a kind of direct path to understanding these social and strategic landscapes they describe.
A shortcut, almost.
Exactly, a shortcut to getting informed on something that, well, it touches pretty much everything, doesn't it?
It really does. And what these sources present is a very particular view of the world. It's one where understanding and maybe applying certain principles isn't just about gaining power.
Right.
It's fundamentally about avoiding powerlessness, about achieving your goals. It's really about recognizing that there's a certain kind of dynamic, a kind of, let's call it a strategic game, that's always at play.
Whether you choose to play or not.
Whether you choose to play, or even if you just want to understand the mechanics of it. Yeah.
Okay, so let's unpack this first big idea right from the jump. How absolutely crucial appearance and perception are, according to this material. They put it front and center.
Definitely.
One principle they really hammer home is Law 6, essentially saying you must court attention at all cost. The idea is simple. What is unseen counts for nothing.
Zero.
If you're not noticed, you're not a factor. You have to stand out somehow.
Absolutely. The sources really emphasize becoming a magnet for attention.
Yeah.
Appearing larger, more colorful, maybe more mysterious
Than the crowd.
than what they describe as the surrounding, often, bland masses. Look at P.T. Barnum, the showman. A master at this.
Oh, yeah.
Engineering attention, even staging appearances under fake names, like supposedly showing up as the infamous Reverend Avery just to get people talking.
Just for the buzz. And that air of mystery, that seems to really supercharge how people see you. Right?
It does.
The sources point to figures who use this brilliantly. Count Lustig, apparently using mystery like a cloak. Mata Hari described here as, well, maybe not exceptionally brilliant or beautiful.
Average, they say.
But she cultivated this mysterious aura that made her seem almost divine. Even Marcel Duchamp supposedly using mystery around his art to make the mediocre seem profound, make the work more intriguing.
And that cultivation of visibility, of perception, it ties directly into one of the major pitfalls the sources warn against. That's Law 18. Do not build fortresses to protect yourself.
Isolation is dangerous.
Right. Seems counterintuitive. You'd think hiding away is safe.
You would, but they argue isolation actually exposes you to more dangers. You cut yourself off from vital information, from allies.
You become a target.
You become an easy target because you're predictable and alone. Contrast that with someone like Louis XIV. Versailles wasn't about hiding.
He used it as this magnificent center to keep the powerful nobles close, under his eye, where he could gather info, maintain control. He avoided that trap that, say, Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor of China, fell into.
When he became secluded.
Yeah, when he became secluded later in life and lost his grip.
So it's not about vanishing. It's about controlling how and where you're seen, who you interact with, which, interestingly, links to Law 25, recreate yourself. The advice isn't just be visible, but consciously forge your identity. Don't let society define you. Create a persona that commands attention, never gets boring.
And they give compelling examples. Caesar, for instance, using dramatic flair, real theatricality in his appearances, his speeches.
Like putting on a show.
Literally using dramatic devices to amplify his actions seem larger than life. Or George Sand, the writer, adopting male clothes, a male persona.
Big deal back then.
Huge break from expectations. It forged an identity that gave her freedom and drew massive attention.
But, okay, these sources aren't just about puffing yourself up. They also give a crucial warning, particularly in Law 46, about appearing too perfect.
Yes.
That kind of perceived flawlessness can breed intense envy, resentment, makes you a target.
The story they use of Michelangelo and Bramante illustrates this perfectly. Michelangelo's seeming perfection in sculpture was, well, deeply threatening to Bramante.
It was looked bad.
Maybe felt his own lesser skill was exposed. The sources describe Bramante's envy driving him to try and sabotage Michelangelo, suggesting to the Pope that Michelangelo, a sculptor, should paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling.
Thinking he'd fail.
Expecting total failure, ruining his reputation.
What?
Instead, well, Masterpiece. But it shows how that perception of perfection stirred up dangerous feelings.
So if appearance is managing the front, the sources also dive deep into controlling what's behind that front, exploring the art of strategic indirectness and, yeah, sometimes deception.
Definitely not always direct confrontation.
No.
A key principle here is Law 3, conceal your intentions. The idea being you can effectively hide your real goals by dangling a decoy, something shiny, right in front of people.
Why does that work?
Because people tend to take appearance for reality. They focus on the obvious thing, the decoy, and completely miss what you're actually doing in the background.
And Law 12 is fascinating. Use selective honesty and generosity to disarm your victim. Suggest one sincere, well-timed, honest act or gift.
Just one.
Can create such a powerful impression it covers countless dishonest moves, lowers their guard, makes them vulnerable.
Joseph Duveen, the art dealer, is the classic example cited here. He helped found the National Gallery of Art in D.C. Huge public act of generosity.
That's great.
Looked fantastic.
Yeah.
Served as what the sources call a perfect front. Let his wealthy clients donate art, get tax breaks, feel noble, all while facilitating Duveen's business, encouraging more deals, selective public good, enabling less transparent stuff.
Smart.
But the sources wisely add a twist. If you have a long history of deceit, sudden honesty looks suspicious, like Count Lustig trying to sell the Eiffel Tower. His reputation made the mark wary right at the end.
Okay, building on that indirectness, there's the crucial tactic of gathering info. Law 14. Pose as a friend, work as a spy.
Simple but critical.
Knowing your rival's thoughts, plans, weaknesses is just fundamental for getting an advantage.
And sometimes you need things done or need to avoid blame without getting your own hands dirty. That's Law 26. Use a cat's paw or scapegoat.
The monkey and the chestnuts.
Exactly that fable. You get the benefit a tough task done, escaping responsibility while someone else takes the risk or the fall.
We see this with Chow Chow, the Chinese general. Grain shortage. His manager raises prices to feed troops. Chow Chow needs to look just, but keep the army fed.
Tricky spot.
So he publicly orders the manager's execution. Scapegoat. Presents him as greedy, wins soldier loyalty, restores order, and privately makes sure the army gets more grain. Manager takes the hit. Chow Chow looks good.
And consider the yellow kid. While the con artist mentioned a lot here, he often used someone the mark already knew.
Someone trust.
Exactly. Often presented as a fellow victim, as the cat's paw. Made the whole thing seem way less suspicious because a familiar face was involved. Leverages existing trust.
Another deceptive role. Law 21. Play a sucker. To catch a sucker seem dumber than your mark. The idea is people let their guard down around someone they think is less smart.
They get arrogant.
Overconfident, easy to manipulate because they assume your apparent lack of smarts means you're no threat.
Yellow kid. Weil, again, brilliant at this. One scheme involved a rigged boxing match, fake lodge sale. He made the mark, Giesel, feel superior to Weil's accomplices who were playing dumb victims.
So Giesel thought he was the clever one.
Thought he was spotting the angles, completely missing he was the real target. And Weil didn't just act dumb. He created incredibly realistic, fake businesses, yacht clubs, brokerages,
Simulation.
convincing decoys to trap marks. It's a kind of mirror effect, but based on deception. Count Lustig's dollar duplication machine scam, too. The mark's greed makes them want to believe in the easy money.
Speaking of appearing effortless, Law 30 offers a different kind of indirectness. Make your accomplishments seem effortless. That Renaissance idea, sprezzatura.
Right.
The advice is hide the work. Conceal the toil, the practice. Let people just marvel at your apparent grace, natural talent, ease.
Yeah, because as the sources point out, power often depends on how things look. If something looks too hard, like it took immense effort, it can actually detract from your aura.
It makes you seem less powerful.
Potentially. The Renaissance courtier was the ideal mastering skills, but making them look natural. The example of Senno Rikyu, the tea master, preparing for Hideyoshi is beautiful.
Clearing the snow.
Meticulously cleared snow from the stepping stones, but did it so the gesture seemed simple, spontaneous, almost accidental, effortless, not laborious.
And here's where it gets really strategically complex, I think. Law 44 suggests using the mirror effect to disarm opponents.
This is a really versatile tactic they describe. It can mean mirroring your opponent's actions to confuse them.
Copycatting.
Sort of. Or creating a convincing simulation of reality that traps them in their own expectations. Or reflecting their own flaws, desires, values back at them to gain insight or control.
Like Fouché.
Exactly. Fouché, facing Napoleon's suspicion and spies, used this. Had his own spies watch Napoleon's spies, then set up situations that mirrored perfect loyalty. Neutralized Napoleon's doubts without direct confrontation.
No.
The sources also mentioned Dr. Erickson's therapeutic use, having a couple act out their fight at dinner so they see their dynamic reflected. Weil's realistic fake businesses are another form of this.
Mirroring legitimacy.
Yes. Even Alcibiades, the Greek statesman, used a kind of mirroring. Adopted the customs, the appearance of those around him, Spartans, Persians like a chameleon. Blending in, disarming potential adversaries.
Okay, shifting to when you need help or want something. The sources offer advice that feels, well, pretty counterintuitive. Law 13. When asking for help, appeal to people's self-interest, never to their mercy or gratitude.
This is a core principle in the material. Feels cold, maybe, but the reasoning is purely pragmatic. They argue reminding people of past favors you did. Largely useless.
Why?
Because people will minimize the obligation, find excuses, even resent being reminded. Instead, you must focus entirely on what they stand to gain from helping you.
What's in it for them?
What's in it for them? Emphasize that potential benefit, and they'll be enthusiastic because they see something concrete for themselves.
The example of Athens and Corcyra really hits this home. Corcyra asks for aid against Corinth.
Yeah.
Athens doesn't think about past help from Corcyra. Their decision is purely based on the strategic advantage they gain against Corinth by allying with Corcyra. Pure self-interest.
Or Yelu Chuxai, convincing Genghis Khan not to wipe out the population of China. Didn't appeal to mercy.
Oh, wow.
Appealed to Khan's greed. Argued that keeping them alive meant massive ongoing tax revenue. That worked.
But the sources do admit sometimes people are motivated by wanting to look good, right?
Right, they aren't totally absolute. They acknowledge some people want to appear generous, especially publicly, like Duveen cultivated among Mellon's staff.
So you appeal to that self-interest.
Exactly. The desire for reputation, public acclaim. Give them chances to display their supposed virtue.
And speaking of things people want, Law 40 gives a blunt warning. Despise the free lunch.
Anything free is dangerous.
According to this material, yeah. Because it almost always comes with hidden strings, tricks, psychological ties. Paying your own way keeps you independent.
The story of Gonzalo Pizarro and El Dorado illustrates this. The local people, wanting rid of the brutal Spanish,
didn't fight them directly.
No. Offered the free lunch tales of a city of gold, led Pizarro on a devastating chase through the jungle. A deception designed to destroy them through their own greed for something free.
Wow. Okay, a fundamental principle for just dealing with people, according to Law 19, is know who you're dealing with, do not offend the wrong person.
Sounds obvious, but crucial.
People react so differently. An insult one person shrugs off might deeply wound another, be remembered forever, lead to revenge later.
The source tells about the ruler of Cheng insulting Prince Cheng'er when he was in exile. Seemed powerless.
Bad move.
Terrible move. Didn't realize he was dealing with someone cunning and ambitious. Years later, Cheng'er gets power, takes revenge on Cheng. The lesson's stark. Even if someone seems small now, avoid unnecessary offense. You don't know their capacity for resentment or future power.
Law 38 adds another layer to fitting in. Think as you like, but behave like others. Outward conformity,
Behaving like those around you?
is a crucial protective shield. Stops you attracting suspicion, looking different in a way that makes you a target.
The example of Pausanias, the Spartan general, shows what happens if you ignore this. Abroad, he adopted Persian customs, dress, seen as arrogant, even treasonous back home.
He kept doing it.
Kept doing it when he returned, attracted huge suspicion, ultimately led to his condemnation. Contrast that with Bertolt Brecht, the playwright.
Facing the Un-American Activities Committee.
Right. Despite his radical politics, he shows up in a suit, tie, uses deliberately ambiguous language. Conformed outwardly enough to deflect attack, even charm some members.
And just looping back quickly, Law 46, appearing too perfect, that's also presented as a way to manage envy, right?
Exactly. It's about controlling the perception of your success to avoid resentment.
Like Boris Godunov and George Washington.
Both described as gaining power by seeming reluctant, even unambitious, made others insist they take the role.
So it looks like duty, not ambition.
Deflects envy, makes their rise seem like fulfilling a public need, not a personal grab.
Okay, let's shift gears because timing, presented as absolutely critical in these sources. Law 33. Master the art of timing. The advice is counterintuitive. Never seem in a hurry.
Appearing patient suggests control.
Yeah, suggests, the right moment to act.
This principle calls for becoming a keen observer, almost a detective of the right moment. Knowing when the time just isn't right, you have to hold back.
And when to strike.
And when conditions are perfect, and you should strike fiercely. Bismarck, the Prussian statesman, is a prime example here. Waited patiently for years, built strength, maneuvered, sensed the precise moment.
Before pushing for war with Austria.
Exactly. His timing was crucial for unifying Germany eventually.
And look at the contrast they give. Napoleon's 100 Days Return.
Oh, yeah?
The sources describe that not as masterful timing, but as a rush, driven by emotion, impulse.
Not control.
No. This rapid, uncontrolled move exhausted his resources, led to Waterloo. He wasn't fully in control of the timing or the consequences.
Which connects directly to Law 29. Plan all the way to the end. The sources really emphasize foresight. You need to visualize the whole sequence, not just the next step.
To avoid just reacting.
Exactly. To overcome that natural tendency to just react impulsively to things as they happen.
Cardinal de Retz's analysis of the French Revolutionaries' mistake.
During the Fronde.
Right. When young Louis XIV left Paris, they felt relief, thought they'd won. But de Retz saw it as their big error. They didn't foresee the king's absence would let the court regroup, ultimately weaken their position.
Didn't plan far enough ahead.
Exactly.
And sometimes controlling timing means disrupting others' sense of it. That brings us to Law 17. Keep others in suspended terror. Cultivate an air of unpredictability.
Keep them guessing.
Right. If you're predictable, others plan around you, feel in control. By being deliberately inconsistent, strategically erratic.
Not just random.
No, strategically unpredictable. You keep opponents off balance, wear them out, trying to figure out your next move.
Stonewall Jackson, the Confederate general, used this famously. His movements were often baffling to the Union generals.
Kept them guessing.
Kept them guessing his intentions, locations. This unpredictability delayed their attack on Richmond, gave the Confederacy crucial time to reinforce.
Now, a critical timing lesson and a major potential pitfall comes after victory. Law 47. Do not go past the mark you aimed for. In victory, learn when to stop.
Victory is dangerous.
The moment of victory is often the most dangerous, the sources warn, due to arrogance, overconfidence pushing you too far, leading to overreach.
Cyrus the Great is the classic example of violating this. Continuous, stunning victories just kept expanding.
We have to stop.
Made too many enemies, spread forces too thin, ultimately contributed to his downfall, couldn't recognize when enough was enough. Contrast that with Madame de Pompadour.
Louis XV's mistress.
Held her position longer than most because she never pressed her luck too hard after gaining favor, knew when to stop pushing.
Now, the sources also note some reversals or exceptions to this. Machiavelli, for example, argued sometimes complete destruction of an enemy is safer than half punishment.
Leaves them wanting revenge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Conversely, in war, sometimes letting a beaten enemy escape is better than cornering them completely. A cornered army fights desperately.
Makes sense. Law 36 offers a tactic involving timing and, well, absence. Disdain things you cannot have. Ignoring them is the best revenge.
The principle is simple. The more attention you give something negative, an insult, a rival, a problem you can't solve, the more real and powerful it seems.
So ignoring it denies its power.
Denies it power, validity. Queen Elizabeth I used her unavailability for marriage masterfully. Kept suitors hoping, but never committing.
Maintained power over them.
For years. Used absence and delayed gratification strategically. Pietro Aretino, facing attacks on his fake aristocratic background, just ignored his accusers.
Didn't defend it.
No. Defending it would have amplified the scandal. By disdaining the attacks, he eventually diffused the whole thing.
Okay, moving beyond just strategy and timing, these sources dive deep into influencing people, not just by force or tricks, but by understanding and engaging their desires, their beliefs. Law 27. Play on people's need to believe to create a cult-like following.
The core idea here is that people crave excitement, something romantic, something to believe in beyond the everyday grind.
They want something more.
They're drawn to figures who offer vision, hope. Figures like Bori attracted followers by talking about visions, promising joy, tapping into that deep yearning. Michael Schuppach, a country doctor back in the 1700s.
The mountain doctor.
Right. Used elaborate spectacles, rituals around his treatments, leveraged people's need to believe in healing their own hypochondria to effect cures. The sources stress, while the patient's belief was key.
Schuppach made sure he was seen as the agent.
Exactly. He ensured he was perceived as the essential agent of transformation. not just their own willpower.
Think of George Salmanazar creating that whole fantasy world Formosa that London society wanted to believe in, or Mamugna becoming the alchemist Bragadino,
Promising gold for Venice.
capitalizing on Venice's desperation for redemption. And the sources note a subtle trick. These grand fantasies often need a backdrop of the mundane to seem plausible.
Like Dr. Weisslater's elaborate contractions built around something seemingly scientific like moon rays made his cures believable. This connects powerfully to Law 43. Work on the hearts and minds of others. The sources argue brute force might get submission, but genuine persuasion, winning people over emotionally, intellectually,
That's more powerful long term.
far more powerful, more durable, leads to loyalty, not just reluctant obedience.
The example of Zhuge Liang, the Chinese strategist, is really compelling here. Facing his enemy, Meng Wo,
Instead of crushing him.
captured and released him 7 times, each time treated Meng Wo and his troops with respect, leniency, systematically worked on his heart and mind.
Demonstrated magnanimity, brilliance.
Until Meng Wo finally surrendered out of genuine admiration, loyalty, not just military defeat.
And Law 45 adds a crucial nuance, especially about change. Preach the need for change, but never reform too much at once.
People don't like too much change too fast.
Exactly. The sources warn people are creatures of habit. Too much sudden radical change is deeply unsettling, generates resistance.
Mao Zedong is presented as understanding this. A revolutionary leader, massive change, but he deliberately linked his reforms to revered figures from Chinese tradition.
Like Zhuge Liang, Emperor Qin.
By presenting his changes as in line with a glorious interpreted past, he made them more psychologically palatable. Contrast that with Cromwell's reforms in England.
Took much longer to stick.
The sources suggest they lacked that anchoring in tradition. It's about sensing the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age, understanding how much change people can handle.
And finally, capturing hearts and minds often involves spectacle. Law 37. Create compelling spectacles, symbols, visuals, grand gestures.
They hit you immediately.
Immediate emotional impact that words often can't match.
King Menzies of Egypt using a golden foot bath just to impress people with his majesty. Louis XIV's entire court at Versailles.
A massive spectacle.
Designed to awe and control. The sources contrast this with Lorenzo de' Medici in Florence. Different environment.
Merchant class, not nobility.
He won loyalty through simpler gestures. Generosity, art patronage blending in. Avoiding the kind of spectacle that attracts envy in less centralized Florence.
So yeah, these sources aren't just a playbook for offense. They're also a strong warning about dangerous traps. We mentioned isolation earlier, Law 18.
Qin Shi Shuangti, losing control.
Exactly. But another significant pitfall is succession. Law 41. Avoid stepping into a great man's shoes.
Hard act to follow.
Incredibly difficult. The sources explain the successor is almost always compared unfavorably, seen as squandering the inheritance, often because they lack the driving necessity, the struggle that shaped a predecessor.
Louis XV, following Louis XIV, the Sun King, he struggled under that legacy, right?
Constantly. Often perceived as squandering the wealth Louis XIV had built, partly because his reign lacked the intense pressures that forged his predecessor.
But Napoleon III.
He used his granduncle Napoleon's name, sure, but quickly worked to establish his own distinct reign. Didn't just imitate. Or Pericles in Athens learned from his predecessor's mistakes,
Like Aristides, Themistocles.
who were eventually ostracized, partly for arrogance. Pericles makes sure to connect with the people, avoid their fate.
Law 42 warns against another tactical error. Strike the shepherd and the sheep will scatter. Attacking the leader
To figurehead.
is often way more effective than fighting everyone. Remove the head, followers get disorganized, demoralized.
Ivan the Terrible used this brilliantly. Facing opposition from the boyars, he temporarily abdicated, put in a figurehead, caused chaos among the boyars,
Proved they needed him.
proved his indispensability as the true shepherd. They begged him to come back. Rasputin, too, mentioned as gaining influence by targeting the Tsarina,
The isolated weak link.
rather than the whole formidable court structure.
And circling back to Law 19, not offending the wrong person, the sources highlight Duveen again, trying to get rival dealers to pool resources.
During a downturn.
His past cutthroat reputation meant, despite the rational proposal, they couldn't trust him. His history made even a good idea suspect.
And Law 22 suggests a really counterintuitive tactic for weakness. Use the surrender tactic. Transform weakness into power.
Surrender to win.
Surrendering when losing is presented not as giving up, but as a strategic move to buy time. Time to recover, undermine from within, plan for later.
The Athenian general Sertorius example.
Yes. After a demoralizing retreat, army shattered. Didn't force a big attack, used fables like pulling horsehairs one by one.
Easier than the whole tale.
To show his soldiers that small, easy wins rebuild confidence better than attempting impossible big ones. Used the tactical surrender to rebuild morale from within.
Smart.
And finally, they revisit the pitfall of failing to conform outwardly, Law 38, circling back to Pausanias again, his Persian customs.
Generated suspicion, distrust.
Ultimately led to his downfall. Highlights how dangerous ignoring outward conformity can be.
So, wow, we've taken a pretty deep dive into this collection of principles, covered everything from crafting your image, cultivating mystery, to mastering timing, understanding motivations, and gauging beliefs.
It really is a perspective that sees the world as a place where these power dynamics are just constantly in motion. And understanding them is presented not just as a path to getting what you want,
Right.
but as a fundamental way to avoid being rendered powerless, ineffective.
This deep dive really highlights how strategy, careful perception management, and a keen understanding of what really drives people, often self-interest, sometimes that deep need to believe, are key navigating tools. The framework here feels less about good or bad,
Definitely.
and more about cause and effect, action and reaction, and how people interact.
And the sources strongly suggest that just trying to opt out, to ignore these dynamics, isn't really a viable path. They imply that retreating from these realities leads to isolation, vulnerability.
Powerlessness and misery, they say.
Yeah. Instead, the emphasis is squarely on developing awareness, the ability to analyze situations objectively, recognize the strategic patterns.
So what does digging into all this mean for you, listening? Well, these sources really encourage you to become a more astute observer, to learn not just from your own mistakes, but from others, often through these historical examples.
Maybe to recognize negative patterns and break them by applying some insights, even if it's just for self-protection.
They challenge you to look beneath the surface of interactions you see every day, politicians, work dynamics, friends, even online stuff, and see the underlying strategies possibly at play.
Yeah, to see what might be going on underneath.
And here's a provocative thought to leave you with. If understanding these laws is presented as crucial for navigating the world and avoiding powerlessness, like these sources claim, how does gaining this knowledge actually change your perspective? Does it empower you to spot potential manipulation and strategy more clearly? Or does it risk making you start seeing manipulation and strategic calculation absolutely everywhere?
Interesting question.
Something to think about.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thank you for listening. If you found value in this audio, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful content on motivation, habits, and wealth building. New audiobooks and summaries are uploaded every week, so stay tuned and keep growing. This is Neural Wealth, where your mindset meets your future. Until next time, stay focused, stay hungry, and stay inspired.